You came into the world under bright, electric light, and a stranger in clean gloves stood ready to catch you. A machine counted your heartbeat before you had taken a single breath. Somebody wrote down the exact minute you arrived, then handed you to your mother, who was exhausted and sore and alive. That last word is the one to hold on to. Alive. For almost the entire run of our species, birth came with no gloves, no machine, and no second room down the hall stocked with everything a mother in trouble might need. There was a body doing the hardest work a body can do, a few people crowded close in the dark, and a night that did not care how the story ended. Our kind has been around for something like 300,000 years. The doctor and the beeping monitor showed up in the final flicker of that time. Wind the story back far enough, and giving birth becomes the most dangerous thing a human being does. In some early populations, in roughly 1 birth out of 100, the mother did not come through, and a woman who reached adulthood might go through labor 8 or 9 separate times. Run those odds across a whole life, and the total climbs into a place that should give you pause. Nearly every person breathing right now descends from a long line of women who came through a thing that so many women did not. So picture her. A young mother somewhere in the deep past, gripping a wooden post or another woman's forearms, doing the one job our entire future depended on, with no way to summon help that could truly save her if it all went wrong. How did she come through it? The answer reaches past the pain and into the bones of your own hips, and it quietly rewrites the story of how we became human at all. Each piece of this gets stranger than the last, so stay with it. Go back with me. The fire has burned low. A woman has slipped away from the main group to a smaller shelter of hide and branches, and 2 older women have gone with her. Nobody speaks much. They have all seen this before, and they all know how many ways it can turn. Outside, the rest of the band pretends to sleep. Everyone is listening. It may have started before dawn, a dull ache low in her back that she tried to ignore while the group ate. By midday, she could not ignore it. The pains came in waves now, rolling in and easing off and rolling in again, closer together each time, and the older women read them like weather. They knew this could run through the night and into the next day. They knew early labor could stop and start for hours, and that the real test waited at the end, in the stretch of minutes when the body takes over completely and the mother has no choice left but to push. There was no clock to tell her how long. There was only the next wave, and the next, and the low voices telling her she was doing it right. To understand why she is in danger, you have to understand something strange about the human body. Compared with nearly every other animal, we are terrible at being born. A foal drops from its mother and stands within an hour. A baby whale swims. A newborn monkey grabs its mother's fur and holds on while she keeps climbing. Human labor can last most of a day. It often needs a second pair of hands, and it goes wrong often enough that we built entire buildings to manage it. Something happened to us on the long road out of the trees, and that something started with a simple change. We stood up. Around 4 million years ago, our ancestors began walking on 2 legs full time. Standing upright freed the hands and let us cross open ground, and it reshaped the pelvis to carry weight in a new way. The hips narrowed and tilted to form a bowl that could hold the guts of an upright animal and drive a striding walk. A scientist named Sherwood Washburn looked at this trade in the middle of the last century and named the problem it created. He called it the obstetrical dilemma. Walking well demands a narrow pelvis. Giving birth demands a wide one. Evolution could not fully satisfy both, so it split the difference and left every human mother stuck in the gap. For a couple of million years, that gap was tight but manageable. Then our ancestors grew the one organ that made everything worse and everything better at the same time. The brain got bigger. Over roughly the last 2 million years, human brain size more than doubled, and a big brain sits inside a big skull. Now the widest, hardest part of the baby had to pass through a canal that walking had already narrowed. The margin between the size of the opening and the size of the head shrank to almost nothing. In a modern human birth, the baby's head clears the mother's pelvis with a spare space you could sometimes measure in millimeters. There is no other primate cutting it that close. Here is where it gets genuinely weird, and here is the part almost nobody knows. Because the fit is so tight, the human baby cannot simply drop straight through. It has to turn. The head enters the canal facing one way, then rotates a quarter turn partway down to line up its longest measurements with the changing shape of the passage, and it usually comes out facing backward, away from the mother's body. Watch a monkey give birth and you see the opposite. The infant emerges facing the mother, who can reach down, guide it up, and clear its face herself. A human baby arrives with its back turned to the one person most desperate to see its face. If that mother reaches down and pulls, she pulls against the natural bend of the newborn's spine and neck, and she can do real harm without ever meaning to. Alone, she is close to helpless at the exact moment help matters most. Two anthropologists, Rosenberg and Trevathan, followed that fact to a conclusion that changes how we picture the whole ancient world. They argued that the twist in the human birth canal made another person almost necessary. Someone had to be there to receive the baby, to guide it up and forward the way the mother could not, to wipe its face and coax the first breath. They called it obligate midwifery. Birth, for our ancestors, stopped being a private animal act and became a social event. Long before we had farms or cities or writing, we had women helping other women survive the thing that made more humans. The oldest form of skilled care may be older than almost everything else we call civilization. Sit with the size of that idea. The next time someone tells you cooperation is a thin coat of paint over a selfish species, remember that we may have been catching each other's children for 1,000,000 years. It is hard to build a lonelier picture of early humans when the evidence points to a hut, a laboring woman, and other hands reaching in to help. Now the question sharpens. How far back does this danger really go? For that we leave theory behind and go to the bones, because the pelvis of a woman who lived and gave birth long ago still carries the shape of the passage her children came through. The most famous ancient woman we have is Lucy, a member of Australopithecus afarensis, who lived in what is now Ethiopia around 3.2 million years ago. A large part of her skeleton survived, including much of her pelvis. Researchers Robert Tague and Owen Lovejoy reconstructed that pelvis and studied the space inside it. Lucy walked upright, and her hips already show the wide, flared, basin-like shape that upright walking demands. Her babies had small brains, so the head was not yet the problem it would become. Yet the passage was already an odd, flattened oval, wide from side to side and short from front to back. Some researchers think her infants may have entered the canal sideways and passed through with little or no rotation, a birth unlike a modern one and unlike a chimpanzee's. More than 3 million years ago, before fire, before language as we know it, the human way of being born was already becoming its own strange thing. Push forward to a cousin who came terribly close to us. The Neanderthals lived across Ice Age Europe and Asia, and they had brains as large as ours or larger. That raises an obvious and grim question. If a big head is what makes human birth so hard, were Neanderthal births even worse? Timothy Weaver and Jean-Jacques Hublin took a fragmentary female Neanderthal pelvis and built a careful digital reconstruction of the birth canal. Their finding was subtle. Neanderthal birth looked to be about as tight as ours, so their newborns faced the same narrow squeeze, but the internal shape suggested their babies might have rotated less, entering and leaving in a more straightforward line. Same brutal fit, slightly different path. Two kinds of human, two kinds of hard birth, both surviving it well enough to fill a continent with children who filled it with more. Between Lucy and the Neanderthals stands the ancestor who set the trap for good, Homo erectus, which spread out of Africa more than 1.5 million years ago. Erectus had a body built much like ours and a brain well on its way to modern size, and its infants were the first to press hard against the limits of the canal. A remarkably complete female erectus pelvis found at Gona in Ethiopia, studied by Scott Simpson and Seleshi Sama, turned out to be surprisingly wide enough to pass a fairly large-headed baby. Even so, the squeeze had begun, and the answer our line reached for was quietly radical. If the head could not grow much more before birth, then most of the growing would have to happen after it. That is why a human baby arrives so absurdly unfinished. A newborn foal runs on its first day. A newborn human cannot hold up its own head. Some researchers put it in stark terms. If our infants stayed inside until their brains reached the state of a newborn ape, pregnancy might run closer to 18 or 20 months, and no human pelvis could ever pass the result. So we are all born early, pushed out into the cold while still soft and unsteady, to finish in the open the growth that other animals finish in the womb. Your months of helpless infancy were part of what let your mother come through it all. She could not have carried you to true readiness and stayed well herself. So the danger is old, it is deep, and it is written into the skeleton. Which brings up a fair objection, and a good scientist should always chase the objection. If being born is this bad for us, why did evolution not simply grow the mother a wider pelvis, or shrink the head, or shorten the pregnancy so the baby comes out smaller and finishes growing later? For decades, the answer was Washburn's trade. A wider pelvis would ruin our walking and running, so we were stuck. Then a researcher named Holly Dunsworth looked hard at that assumption and was not convinced. She and her colleagues pointed out that nobody had actually shown a wider pelvis makes a person walk worse, and the numbers on that turned out to be shaky. So she proposed a different limit. Her idea, sometimes called the metabolic hypothesis, says pregnancy does not end when the baby gets too big for the hips. It ends when the pregnancy gets too big for the mother's own energy budget. Growing a baby burns an enormous amount of fuel, and a mother's body can only run so hot for so long before she cannot keep up. On this view, human babies are born soft and helpless and unfinished for a different reason. The mother reaches the ceiling of what she can pour into a pregnancy, and the safest move left is to be born early and keep growing in the open air. The hips still matter, they just may not carry all the blame. The debate is not settled, and that is exactly why it is worth watching. We are still arguing about the meaning of our own birth. Set the theories down for a moment and stand back inside that ancient hut, because a laboring woman does not care which hypothesis is winning. She cares about getting through the night. So what did surviving actually look like? Start with a detail that surprises almost everyone. She was probably not lying on her back. For most of human history, women gave birth upright. They squatted, they knelt, they sat on another woman's lap, they hung from a branch or a rope or a leaning post, and let gravity pull in the same direction as they're pushing. The image of a mother flat on a bed with her feet in the air is a recent one, tied to physicians a few centuries ago who found that position easier to watch and manage. Your ancestors would have found it slightly mad. Upright, the pelvis opens a little wider, the pushing goes with gravity instead of against it, and the woman keeps some command of her own body. It was practical knowledge, and it was correct. Around her were the other women, and their real gift was not their hands. It was their memory. An older woman who had given birth several times and helped at a dozen more carried a library that existed nowhere else. She knew what a normal labor sounded like and what a dangerous one sounded like. She knew which position to try when the pushing stalled. She knew the plants the group used to calm a mother or ease a hard labor, remedies passed down by mouth for so many generations that nobody remembered inventing them. Some of them genuinely useful, and some of them useless but comforting. In a world with no written medicine, the mind of an experienced older woman was the medicine. This is one quiet reason our species keeps its women alive long past the age of having their own children, when most animals are already gone. A grandmother who remembers the last hard birth is worth more than almost anything the group owns. That last point has a name in science, and it is one of the stranger facts about our kind. Human women routinely live for decades after they can no longer bear children. Almost no other mammal does this. The anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, working among the Hadza foragers of Tanzania, watched older women out digging tubers and feeding grandchildren long past their own childbearing years, and she built a case that this is no accident of modern comfort. A grandmother who survives feeds the young, frees the mother to have her next child sooner, and carries the memory the group leans on when a birth turns dangerous. In a species where being born is so perilous, the woman who has already come through it many times becomes priceless. Menopause, oddly enough, may be one more thing that childbirth built. Once humans began leaving art and objects behind, the helping hands started showing up in them. At Catalhoyuk, a 9,000-year-old town in what is now Turkey, archaeologists found a figure of a seated woman apparently in the act of giving birth, flanked by two large animals. Thousands of years later in Egypt, a decorated mud birth brick was excavated at Abydos, painted with images of a mother, a child, and protective figures. Women there delivered crouched on a pair of such bricks, an early version of the birth stool that shows up again and again across the ancient world. When the oldest layers of written history mention childbirth at all, midwives are already in the room, already named, already carrying a craft that was old before anyone thought to record it. Nobody wrote down the first midwife. She worked 10,000 generations before writing existed. The picture was never simple, and it is worth being honest about that. Among the Jew Hoansi of the Kalahari, whose way of life gives us one of our closest windows onto foraging societies, a woman was expected to walk a short way from camp and give birth alone if she could, and doing so was counted as real courage. Even then, the help was rarely far off. Older women hovered at the edge of hearing, ready to come at a cry, and a first birth or a hard labor drew them straight in. The ancient rule bent from group to group. Sometimes many hands, sometimes the fierce pride of doing it alone with the band a shout away. What stayed constant underneath was the knowledge, the hard-won sense of what to do when a body reached its limit. Now the hard parts themselves, because honesty requires them. The hardest was obstructed labor, a baby simply too large or turned the wrong way to pass easily. Today that ends in a surgery both mother and child usually come through. In the deep past there was no such option, and a labor like that could last for days and put both mother and child in real danger. A mother's body could lose too much strength after birth, and those women had few ways to help it recover quickly. In the days that followed, there was the unseen threat of illness, with no medicine to meet it, reaching mothers who had already come through the hardest part. And there was the breach, the baby arriving feet or backside first, a birth that skilled hands could sometimes turn, and that tested every bit of knowledge the group had. Then there were twins, which turned an already hard night into something harder still. Two babies meant more that could go the wrong way and more strain on the mother, and a group with little food had to stretch to care for both. A birth like that asked more of everyone, from the mother to the women helping her, to the whole band that would share the extra load in the weeks that followed. 2 new lives at once was a great deal to ask of a world with so little to spare. Against all of that, what did they really have? They had position, and knowledge, and each other, and time bought by a group that would carry a weakened mother and feed her while she healed. They had the plain toughness of bodies shaped by 100,000 generations of exactly this test. And they had the long, patient work of natural selection, because the women whose bodies and instincts carried them through are the women who became ancestors, and their endurance is written into every generation that followed. Every generation, that same test came around again. You are sitting at the far end of an unbroken line of women who came through, in the hardest lottery our species ever ran. Think about the first breath, because everything hung on it. A baby in the womb takes no air. Its lungs sit folded and full of fluid, and in the space of a few seconds after birth, they have to open and pull in the first breath they will ever draw. Usually it happens on its own. Sometimes the baby needs a moment, and someone has to know to gently clear its mouth, to rub its back, to warm it, and coax out that first cry. That knowledge, held in the hands of an older woman, made all the difference in those first fragile minutes. There was the cord to deal with as well, cut and tied with whatever the group trusted, and the afterbirth to deliver safely, a second small stage that had to be handled with care. Every step we now hand to machines and gloved specialists once lived inside somebody's memory, and it passed on the only way anything passed on, by watching, by doing, by being there the next time. And then, if the night was kind, the cry came. A thin, furious, unmistakable sound, the one the whole listening band had been waiting for. Somewhere out in the dark, people who had said nothing let out a long breath. The most dangerous thing a human can do had been done one more time, and it had ended the way we all silently hope every story like it ends. That is the thought worth carrying out of the ancient hut. Turn it toward yourself for a second. Somewhere behind you stands a mother who survived this, and behind her another, and behind her another, back through firelit shelters and ice-age caves and the wide grasslands where Lucy walked. Not one link in that chain broke before it passed life forward. The chain runs through hundreds of thousands of years, and it ends, for now, in you. You are the current proof that all of them made it. We like to measure how far we have come by our machines, by the bright rooms and the monitors and the surgeons who can now step in and help in the moments the ancient world had to meet with knowledge and courage alone. That progress is real, and it has saved a staggering number of mothers and children, and it is worth every bit of the pride we put in it. But it sits on top of a far older achievement, one with no tools in it at all. Long before medicine, women worked out how to help each other through the tightest passage evolution ever built, and they did it well enough, often enough, for long enough, that we are here to be amazed by it. So the next time you pass a stranger on the street, remember what stands behind them. A woman gripping a post in the dark, other women reaching in to help, and a first thin cry answered by relief you and I will never have to feel. Every one of us is the end of that story, and the middle of it, and the reason it kept going. Somebody wrote down the exact minute you arrived, then handed you to your mother, who was exhausted and sore, and against the longest odds in human history, alive.